take myself off mute. Hello and welcome to Wednesday of the second week of the Summer Series 2.0 in partnership with H&H. Special day because I'm not wearing my Inspiring Workplaces cap, the first time in about 14 months. Finally, hair's growing out from having cut it myself for the past year. I cannot wait to finally get back in a barbershop chair. Really looking forward to today's session. I said at the beginning of the summer series that from last year and already this year, I learned a lot. And my preconceived ideas, misconceptions of other things were fixed or changed. And I think I'm going to learn a lot today around a very important topic: delivering organizational resilience. So without further ado, I think we should get stuck into the material and get the learning going. So I would like to introduce Rob Robson, Director of People Science at the People Experience Hub. How are you doing, Rob?
Very good. Thank you, Matt. Very good.
Good. Well, like I say, I'm going to hand over to you, and I'll be back in about 20 to 25 minutes to have a conversation, ask some questions.
Okay, brilliant.
Take care.
Hi, everybody. So as Matt said, I'm from the People Experience Hub. Just briefly, what we are is essentially we're an employee feedback company. We have a platform of our own, but what we're a bit different, really, I suppose, is that we are focused on working in partnership with clients to make sure that employee feedback really delivers for them. Okay, so emerging from the pandemic, I think hopefully, well, not hopefully, but I imagine that many of you will actually, really sort of resonate with this picture as we emerge from the 18 months. Last 18 months has been very challenging. No matter where you are, you will have been affected, and your business will have been affected in some way by the coronavirus. Coming from originally a background in sports psychology, although my work has been 20 years plus in business, I've been interested for quite a long while in the emerging topic of resilience, and I've seen a lot of good work come out that crossed the sport and business divide. So I've been keeping an eye out on the research, and a paper came my way that really made me stop and think that this was a really important topic. So it was specifically on organizational resilience. It was towards the end of last year. I thought this is so timely, and my plan was actually to get stuff out on this in January and start talking about it, and started doing some work on it in December. And then in the UK, we went back into lockdown. I thought, hang on a minute, this isn't the time. So a few months later, here we are, talking about it now. But it's, as I said, it's timely, right? And obviously we're coming at the back of one of the worst sort of economic and social crises that the modern world has seen. Its effects will be seen for some time, okay? But I will say, I don't think it's a one-off. If we look at this slide, it tells a bit of a story, really, that, well before the pandemic, analysts were predicting that we'd be going through an extended period of economic volatility. And this timeline doesn't include world wars, but when you look at the major economic shocks that have occurred, you just see that most of them have actually occurred in the last 50 years. And so, the expression, the VUCA, sometimes feels a bit cliched, or it did until last year, but it's certainly something that I can relate to a lot more than I used to be able to when it came to the world of work. So the rest of the talk will go into, what is organizational resilience? We're going to why it's important, the capabilities that underpin it, and the implications for people experience. Now, so we start off with an explanation of what it is, which comes from recent developments in the academic literature. including the capabilities that underpin it. When it comes to implications, it's very much about my interpretation of that, based on my own experience as a psychologist, as a former HR director. So when it comes to the QA and comments at the end, I'd really love to know what you think. Okay, because it's when it comes to that, those implications, it is very much about interpretation. So what is organizational resilience? So you notice I'm using the term organizational resilience and not just resilience. Okay, so it's a dynamic capability of an organization as a whole, as a system, if you like, to anticipate, cope with, and then adapt to existential threats or crises. So it can be things like major disruption in major, things like major technological disruption, as you're seeing in the automotive industry, for example, or it may be what we've seen in the last 18 months or so, the effects of a pandemic. Why should HR be focused on organizational resilience? I think this is an interesting point, because what the research tends to suggest is that we know that individual resilience is important. It's important, and why I think it's a good topic, it's an interesting topic, because it puts well-being and performance on the same page, which is great. But when you look at the research, it suggests that organizational resilience supports resilience at a team level, which supports individual resilience, and therefore it's important to think about that in terms of, if you can get the organizational stuff right, then the rest to a certain extent follows. Okay, and then any investments that you then make at the individual level will be kind of additive, rather than if you get the organizational stuff wrong, then the work you do at an individual level, and actually helping people become more resilient, it's just going to, in essence, be negating the stresses that you're putting on individuals, because of issues at an organizational level. So I think it's really important to think about that whole, in terms of how do we build that organization, the team, the individual, and not just focus on individuals and helping them to cope. I just want to really briefly as well talk about the difference between the topics here. So when we talk about organizational resilience, I mentioned it's about the system as a whole. So that includes things like processes, structures, and systems in the sense of management systems and things, as well as people. So it's the whole thing. Individual resilience is a mental construct, and when you think about it, just to kind of make sure we're on the same page, I suppose, it's something that's protective. It's not just about bouncing back from adversity. It's situational. It's not something that's fixed. It's not something that is inherent and we have or we don't have. And it's something that actually can be enabled by its environment. And then when we look at team resilience, it's more than just the sum of the resilience of the individuals on that team. It's about team processes. It's about things like support, trust, communication, and leadership is really important within that. We've got an ebook that I can actually give a link to that goes into some of this stuff, some of these differences, as well as some more detail in of the concepts that I'm going to be talking about, and I'll share that at the end. So when we come back to this idea of organizational resilience, I just want to quickly touch upon the capabilities that sit underneath each of these three stages. And these three stages are, it's presented by, and the academic behind this is Ducek. Presented as a stage model, but recognizes that they are overlapping and they are interrelated. So it's not, these are not hard boundaries by any sense. But moving into anticipation, I Anticipation is underpinned by observation and identification and preparation. So the whole thing about observation and identification is about being able to look at the environment around you, being able to scan the horizon, gathering knowledge, being able to proactively identify risks, and then to work to actually prepare for what are potentially unknown scenarios. So it's not that you necessarily know, for example, that a pandemic is going to strike. It's that you are well prepared. You've explored a number of potential scenarios that will make you better at dealing with some of the things that might come around the corner. And then that preparation piece, speaks to quite a few of the, if you like, harder processes like risk management, emergency planning, business continuity processes. But it's also on the human side, things like training and simulation, and collaboration is really important. Okay, being able to prepare as a system, as an organization at whole, means that you've got to be able to break down organizational barriers, and people have to be able to work together. And so when I talk about the people experience implications of anticipation, the things that I'd like to pick out, and these are my interpretations, so you might disagree, and I'd love to hear what you think, is I think the concept of psychological availability is, in the original stuff around employee engagement by Kahn, it was a big part of what they described as the conditions for employee engagement, and essentially stressed and overworked employees are less likely to be aware of or be able to engage with what's going on, what the emerging trends are, what do they see in the external environment. So it's just about headspace at the end of the day, and that's a bit of an inconvenient truth perhaps for organizations, because for people to have that headspace implies that potentially that organizations should be investing a little bit more in capacity. The next one is I've pulled out is collaboration. I mentioned it before, and this is really about people working together with trust, sharing openly, working towards shared goals, but also collaborating with not just internally but externally in networks. So just being able to encourage people to be involved in professional bodies and other networking activities may be really important for your ability to see what is coming, what is going to affect your business, and what you might have to prepare for. And then I've chosen alignment to purpose. If you're going to be thinking about emerging kind of risks and challenges, and if you want people to be aware of those, clearly they have to have a point of reference. So understanding of the vision and mission of the organization is really important. Of course, it has other benefits potentially of helping people to understand that, or derive meaning from the role and being able to connect with it. But when I talk about purpose in this sense, it's not necessarily about that more purpose beyond profit notion, but just a sense of purpose that there's clarity around what the organization's goals and things are. Moving into coping, the two steps, or the two sort of capabilities that underpin that are confronting, accepting reality, and then moving into solution development and implementation. Now, that whole thing about confronting, accepting reality is, it's really important then, therefore, for people to feel safe, psychologically safe, to be able to raise concerns, talk about things openly. And then for leaders, it's also about having the humility to know your limits, to sort of think about empowering others. And I think, this is where I think effective employee feedback is really important. So having those listening mechanisms to be able to see and hear what the reality is, what people are telling you, and then to accept it, and not just to be the big I am that says, like, I know what's best. When it comes to solution development and implementation, at this point, when you're in a very challenging period of crisis, it's about fast and effective decision making. If you think about when we went into the pandemic and the first lockdown, that may be that a senior leader, a chief exec, for example, has to make a decision. Right, we're closing down all of our facilities until we know what else is happening. But it also might mean that in local sites or in restaurants, in factories, in shops, etc. Locally, people have got to be able to make decisions quickly that are appropriate at where they are. And so formal and informal networks are really important, as well as things like knowledge management and collaboration again. And in terms of the implications, I've pulled out 3 again. I think communication is probably pretty apparent that communication's got to be clear, effectively, and trusted. It's got to be two-way. You've got to be able to, have these loops of feedback, and so that people know that people know what's going on. Decision makers and implementers know what's going on. I mean, a lot of our clients during the pandemic have really raised their game in terms of using things like pulse surveys to understand how their people are feeling, what they want from the next stage of, for example, opening up and that sort of thing. I've highlighted teamwork, and I've used a slightly different word to collaboration earlier on. So I think of collaborative behavior as, that whole thing about working well, generally sharing is almost more of a spirit of collaboration, whereas at this point, it's just practically getting on, doing the do, knowing your roles, and collectively getting stuff done. Being there to support each other, rolling up your sleeves, and just mobilizing effectively as a unit. And then I've also chosen autonomy, and I mentioned there earlier already about decisions needing to be made quickly, needing to be made in the right place by the people who've got the expertise and information to make them. So it's that idea. An organization that goes into the depths of a crisis and is reliant on every decision going through their exec committee is just going to grind to a halt. There might be a little bit of a tension between teamwork and autonomy. Individuals may have to take actions, may have to just decide to do something and act on it. But so I think it's only an issue if you don't have well-established practices of empowering small teams and empowering individuals. So it's, I thought that was an interesting one that in certain environments, the idea of working together and then working autonomously is maybe slightly in tension, but as with all these things, there are tensions, and you just have to work to resolve them. When I move to adaptation, the 2 kind of key areas for adaptation are reflection and learning, and managing change. Reflection and learning is about a few things. One is establishing a habit of reflection and dialogue. How often do people in your organizations actually pause to think, reflect, to talk? And how often does that dialogue occur, not just with the usual suspects sitting in the same room, but across that diverse population? How many voices are in the room? How many perspectives are in the room? The other side of that is bias for action, and I see quite a lot of organizations where it's kind of held up as a positive, but it can be a real challenge. A bias for action can mean that you move on too quickly to action without having actually defined the problem, let alone understanding what the solution is. And at this stage, if you think about coming out of the pandemic, the temptation may be to do one of 2 things. One is to rush back to what we did before, and the other is to not really think about what we actually, what worked in that period. What did we do well? What do we want to leave behind in the old world? And what did we do that was good for during the crisis, but actually we don't need anymore? Those are big questions that need a good bit of thought and discussion. But it's also important in terms of reflection and learning to be able to value the learning available from mistakes or unexpected outcomes. We did this. Actually, this was unexpected. It may be positive, it may be negative as an outcome. But what can we learn from an unexpected outcome? And then when we talk about managing change, we all know effectively what managing change means. So for me, it's about engaging effectively to build motivation to change, enabling opportunity, removing obstacles to change, and building capability and confidence in new ways of working. And that comes from, you see a little light bulb there, Susan Mickey's COM-B system of behavior. It's one of the things that's coming out of the health environment. And so the implications, the people experience implications in coping, I've pulled out, I've gone to the wrong slide. In adaptation, the people experience implications, okay, I've pulled out purpose, belonging, and trust. So, in terms of purpose, again, after a period of flux, after, for example, we've had to move to much more digital ways of working, re-clarifying vision and mission will help to get people on the same page. Okay, I think that's really important. When you're coming out of a period like this, the goals might seem unclear to people. What are the expectations of us? People are asking, for example, what are the expectations around where and how we work? And there's a huge debate going on about that. I pulled out belonging. And by belonging, really, I mean inclusion. When you need to find solutions to complex problems or answers to big questions about the future, it's really critical that you're able to draw upon a diverse range of voices and perspectives. And it's really important that they feel comfortable expressing their point of view. And additionally, that they want to feel that they are part of building that future. Now, I know that I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted there. And I've also highlighted trust. So coming out of this period of crisis, people have got to be able to trust their leaders, trust their capability, but also trust their motivations. Given all the uncertainty and the potential conclusion, it has to be safe to start taking steps forward. If it feels risky, if you question whether your leaders have got your best interests at heart, then you're more likely to be hesitant about taking steps forward and, for example, going back into the office. Okay, and so I talked about the individual stages in Duchek's model of organizational resilience, the anticipation, coping, and adaptation. But I think there's some big implications that cut across these. So I've already really talked about clarifying purpose. I think, but that I can't really emphasize enough. I think that re-establishing that sense of why you exist, your guiding North Star, really help people to kind of reorientate themselves. I think it's really important that we fundamentally re-examine leadership. It doesn't really matter what you call it. There are many different models: inclusive leadership, servant leadership, transformational leadership. But leaders must be able to engage with empathy, win trust, listen, and enable other people to succeed. We need to flatten the hierarchy. Again, there are different models, and it doesn't mean that you have to go big on, holacracy, for example. But it's important to start thinking about removing unnecessary layers of decision making. And while hierarchy doesn't have to be accompanied by imbalances of power, there's very often a relationship between the two. I think most companies that I'm aware of could raise their game on diversity and inclusion, and I think it's really about fundamentally valuing it. Again, I'm probably preaching it to the converted here. I just think there's quite a lot of window dressing still going on. Probably a little bit more geared towards diversity than inclusion, but inclusion is really the driver. But it's not quite as visible as doing work on diversity. But I think it's really important, and I think that the organizational resilience stuff really kind of brings that home. And I think it's important to particularly for slightly larger businesses to develop a strategic change capability. What does that mean? It means having dedicated structures, resources, methodologies, and tools that run across the business to support change. It's not necessarily about creating top-down change, and it's not about controlling change from the center. Even in an agile environment, it's about enabling local teams to make change happen and providing those points of connection or coordination, making things more efficient for them. So again, you might have completely different views as to what's more relevant to your context, and and I encourage you to think critically about the proposals I've put to you today. So it was a little bit of a whirlwind through a fairly extensive topic. As I mentioned, I do have a sort of an ebook that we've developed, but at this point, I'd like to hand back to Matt, and I can take your questions, and I'd invite comments as well.
Hello. Well, thanks very much, Rob. Just to make sure I was off mute there. A lot to take in, and it's very, very interesting. And we definitely need the link to the ebook to put as part of the blog on demand section too. So if you're watching this on demand, it's already there. If you're watching it live, then we'll put it up over the next 24 hours. Yeah, like I say, a lot to unpick. I suppose big first question, going all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah.
Why organizational resilience? Is it a business imperative to survive when crises happen, and to be able to adapt and change, or is it just the right thing to do for the people within the business and the processes to be resilient as an organization?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's an imperative, for survival, and in a more volatile environment, and at the very least, I think in order to thrive, as an organization, you really need to be able to ride out these challenging situations, because if every time there's a major disruption or a crisis, if you then go to the wire each time and have to spend time building literally, then at some point it's gonna bite you hard.
and is it an imperative to be ready and have that resilience in place? Because once you come out the other side of a crisis or a stress period, you talked about at the end there, people need to trust their leaders to come back or to re-enter normality, speech marks. We're seeing a lot of movement in the labour market right now, one way people like to call it. Is that purely out of people coming out of this period and going, I don't trust my leadership, having gone through this period within that organisation? They didn't have that resilience in place, and now I'm able to move. I'm going to. So, is that another case for having organisational resilience in the first place? So the movement we're starting to see, or is that just a natural what we see from people wanting to move jobs because they haven't been able to?
I mean, I think a fair amount of the movement is sort of, what's the word I'm looking for here? Kind of residual. people have either people have lost jobs or gotten out of certain industries during the pandemic, or they just haven't wanted to move. They might have wanted to move, but they haven't been prepared to sort of take a risk and step out into the job market for a long time. But at the same time, of course, because businesses are coming back, they are recruiting. And so the competition for talent is really hotting up. And so that the way in which you perceive your organization is clearly going to be very important at this point.
Maybe your decisions can be made easier by how your company have acted through this period. And I think that, like I said, there's a lot to unravel. So I'm going to be thinking about this for days and weeks and reading that ebook intently. But I think leading, you say organizational resilience and you have team and really I thought the psychological availability piece and around capacity, and then leading to people having to work really hard. Hearing a lot about burnout coming out of the pandemic now. I'm just wondering again if not having the right processes in place and putting too much strain on people during this period is detrimental to your business during, but also sees them walking out the door at the end as well.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one, particularly for, say, an HR director.
Yeah,
to be the one who goes to the board and says, "Look, we're going to have to increase our capacity here."
Yeah, in a moment of crisis.
Look your finance director in the eye. And I think that's a really good point, because timing is everything, and it's not about the moment of crisis. I think this is about the period, the period afterwards. And so, but we've all been in organizations because efficiency has been the big watchword for many organizations for many decades.
Yeah.
It's so common now for organizations to be trying to do more with less, and actually it's pretty counterproductive in many respects. In terms of organizational resilience, in terms of your ability to deliver change, because people struggle to engage with what's going on. And obviously in well-being terms as well, it's difficult. So, but that timing thing is really important, because during that period of coping, that's all you do. I mean, you're in the crisis. You don't have those big debates, and that's why when you're coming out of it, that is the time to actually begin, really starting the dialogue, reflecting on what's been going on,
getting the feedback,
thinking ahead. And then the bit that you alluded to there is about being prepared for the unexpected, not necessarily being prepared for every eventuality.
No, it's just really interesting. I think it'd be good to revisit this in maybe 6 months. Might be too soon. Maybe a year to actually look back and see what did take place when we started to really get back to normal. So it hopefully will be some sense of normality. I think people see that as a negative word, right now, back to normal. But I'm hoping, I personally am hoping we get back to some sense of normality that was normality about 15, 18 months ago. But like I said, lots to ask. And also all the anecdotal stuff coming out now. My wife works for a company that will remain nameless, and she's an accountant. And there's say 6 in one half of the finance team and 6 in the other half. And the first day, 6 were asked to come back in, 4 called in sick. And, but that's kind of like going to the trust piece of not really trusting the leadership that this is the right decision at the right time. And I haven't been engaging in feedback and asking what their people are thinking. And I just think about that as a one single case study, and then expand that across the UK, the US. That's a lot of people thinking that way.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got 2/3 of a team not turning up on the first day back, it suggests that the organisation hasn't been listening.
Yeah,
it doesn't understand how their people feel.
And the last question for you, and then we'll let you go, because I could interrogate you for hours, Rob. Fundamentally re-examine leadership.
Yeah.
How would you re-examine it? What's good leadership look like to you, or is it different for every business?
I mean, I think it is a little bit different for every business, and I think we have to be a little bit careful of sort of models that tell us exactly what a great leader looks like. I think those have, have been sort of long defunct, and I think what this says to me is we've been talking about leadership in these terms for quite some time, and none of the none of these things that I've put on the table in terms of implications are new topics. They're not new news.
Yeah.
But I think what it says is that actually the stuff that progressive HR people have been talking about for quite a long time maybe has a hook that we can hang it on, and we can use to kind of engage perhaps our more skeptical audiences. But in terms of leadership, I think it's about being able to adapt your leadership to the situation at hand, to be able to, and that requires emotional intelligence, situational awareness, and then there are some core things, I think, valuing things like compassion, seeking to serve the organization or to bring out the best in people, to empower and facilitate rather than just command and control. So that there are sort of themes that are definitely true. But there's a lot, obviously a lot of stuff out there about leadership, and these things have all been said before.
Yeah. Fantastic, and I agree with you, unsurprisingly. I'm really grateful for the talk, Rob. I think we actually have the ebook as in the comments section as well, and we will make sure it's on the blog. But thank you so much for bringing your thinking to the summer series, and I think this will really help a lot of people right now and in the future. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
Yes.
And thank you for watching this Wednesday in the second week of the Summer Series 2.0. Really interesting times that we're going through and we'll be going through for a long time yet. Thanks very much for Gregory saying thank you to Rob there. And we'll be back tomorrow. Ruth will be your host, and I'll be back Friday, but with some fantastic case studies, thought-provoking sessions too, from brands big and small. So stay tuned over the next 4 or 5 weeks, and thanks for being part of it. Cheers. Bye-bye.